All right, President Trump facing several foreign policy challenges, Russia's retaliations against new U.S. sanctions that are on the way, and North Korea's latest ballistic missile test. So how will the Trump administration respond? Joining us, former director of both the NSA and CIA, CNN National Security Analyst General Michael Hayden. General, thank you so much for being with us. You know, the situation with Russia right now, with Vladimir Putin saying he will kick out 755 people who work for U.S. interests in the embassy staff in Russia right now. How would you assess the current status of the U.S.-Russia relationship?
Well, John, it's about as dark as it's been in several decades. I actually heard someone describe the Russian view of the American administration right now as the president being Gulliver, tied down by all the Lilliputians in Washington, like me, the anti-Russian Lilliputian. So it appears as if President Putin, at least for the time being, has cut his losses in terms of a hope of a dramatic change in the Russian-American relationship. Although he didn't cut it completely, John, I think it was quite interesting that he took this step after Congress had passed the additional sanctions, but before the president signed them. So in other words, he's cutting out President Trump from this current action, a little glimmer, room to maneuver for him in the future.
So what does that mean? It means that you think he's not holding President Trump responsible?
Well, I think he's seeing that President Trump is unable to change the direction, the overall direction of American-Russian relations. And so as a matter of style, of keeping options open, the timing, doing it now, not waiting until the president has signed the sanctions, gives him a bit of an opening to play a card perhaps sometime in the future, Allison. But I think we're in this pretty dark state for a very long time.
It's pretty interesting. That's a pretty interesting a note right there that you think he's trying to give the president some space there. The vice president, right now, he's in the Baltics. And Vice President Mike Pence actually made the claim, and we'll play this for you, that it's the president's tough talk, as he's characterizing it, that caused Congress to issue these sanctions. Let's listen to the vice president.
I think the president's confirmed repeatedly that we believe Russia did meddle in U.S. elections. I think he's also said that it could have been other actors as well, but he's confirmed his belief and our intelligence that Russia was involved in meddling in U.S. elections, and it's part of what inspired the bipartisan action in the Congress to codify the sanctions that our administration has been implementing against Russia, and we'll continue to advance that.
Now, General, it may very well be that the vice president's right, that the president did inspire Congress to pass these sanctions, but I'm not sure that the inspiration is quite how he portrays it. It seems as if Congress is saying, we're taking this out of your hands.
Yeah, actually, you know you're winning in Washington, John, when you begin to say that it was your idea rather than the other guys. Although there is one important aspect here that I think we should not ignore, and that's the vice president's trip. He's going to Estonia, Georgia, and Montenegro. 3 countries, 3 friends of the United States who have all had one form of Russian intervention or another since 2007. That's actually a remarkable journey, and I think in itself a pretty strong signal to the Russians that at least the vice president's office very much objects to their behavior.
Well, look, and the president went to Poland, too, before he met, with the G20. So the president, is clearly involved in sort of this geographic boxing in as well. It does seem deliberate.
General, let's talk about North Korea. It just seems to get worse and worse. The news just seems to get worse and worse. There's never any glimmer that North Korea is listening or going to change or cowed at all by the international community. Just this weekend, yet another ballistic missile test. What can the U.S. do?
Allison, not much. Our options here are limited. I think the Trump administration is now beginning to realize that there are some problems out there without real solutions. There are conditions to be managed, and their predecessors didn't have to be weak or unintelligent for this problem to continue. Look, let me lay out maybe 3 tracks that we could go down. One is accepting the North Koreans as a nuclear power. That's not very good. The other is doing something kinetic that could very likely lead to very serious conflict on the Korean Peninsula. That's not good. So where are you left, Allison? You're left where the last 3 administrations have been. Diplomacy, sanctions, and perhaps bucking up the defenses of ourselves and our friends in the region. that's where we are.
General, can I ask you a question? Do you think Kim Jong-un and to a lesser extent Vladimir Putin, and other leaders around the world are watching what's going on in the United States, sort of the chaos that has existed in the West Wing over the last week specifically, but longer in some cases, and seeing that as something they can take advantage of?
I think that might apply more to Putin than to Kim Jong-un. I think Putin sees things on a more global scale. He's actually a clever tactician, even though he might have some strategic weaknesses. For Kim Jong-un, John, I think this is an inevitable logic for the survival of the North Korean regime. So Allison teed this up by saying they don't seem to pay attention. They don't seem to respond. No, they know what they have to do. And I think this course is set. We can moderate it. We can slow it. Perhaps we can even cap it. But these guys are going to be a nuclear power.
Well, here's what President Trump tweeted about this, and I want to get your response. He says, I'm very disappointed in China. Our foolish past leaders have allowed them to make hundreds of billions of dollars a year in trade, yet they do nothing for us. With North Korea, just talk. We will no longer allow this to continue. China could easily solve this problem. Your response to some of those theories.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts immediately come to mind, Allison. Number one, there isn't enough chocolate cake at Mar-a-Lago to convince President Xi to fundamentally change the Chinese approach to North Korea. That's baked into the Chinese definition of self-interest. The other part of the tweet, though, I think is even more interesting, and that's the president beginning to link the Chinese-American commercial relationship with Chinese behavior against North Korea. That's a big step, and we'll see if the president actually carries that out.
And would it be a good idea to carry that out and hurt China somehow on trade?
Well, I mean, that's the kind of decisions that the National Security Council usually tees up for the president. It's the kind of decision in which there are no easy answers. Do I gain here, but what do I give here? The Sino-American relationship is rich and complex, and careful decision-making if you want to put this in jeopardy in order to pressure the Chinese to do that.
Right.
Well, we'll have to see.
General Michael Hayden, always great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So also overseas, deadly protests on the streets in Venezuela after the country's controversial election. What is happening this morning in Venezuela with the...
And Allison Camerata.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to your new day. Chris is off this morning. John Berman joins me here in studio.
Big day, big week.
Great to have you here. So President Trump hitting the reset button after one of the most chaotic weeks of his presidency. In just hours, the new White House Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, will be sworn in. And the standoff between President Trump and his embattled Attorney General will be on display today. The president is set to meet face-to-face with Jeff Sessions at a cabinet meeting this morning.
And as far as we know, the first time they've spoken since the president started saying out loud that he wishes maybe he were gone. All this as President Trump faces several foreign policy threats. Russia's Vladimir Putin has ordered the U.S. to cut its diplomatic staff by more than half in retaliation for new sanctions. And North Korea's latest missile test has President Trump intensifying pressure on China to do more to stop that country's nuclear ambitions. We have all this covered. I want to begin with CNN's Sarah Murray live at the White House. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning, John. Well, it is John Kelly's first day in a very big job. He'll be sworn in later this morning, followed by a cabinet meeting. And of course, the question on top of everyone's minds is, can Kelly actually bring order to this very wild West Wing?
Reince is a good man. John Kelly will do a fantastic job.
President Trump turning to retired four-star General John Kelly for help rebooting a stalled White House agenda and reining in a chaotic West Wing. That's after Reince Priebus became the latest in a string of high-profile Trump officials to be pushed out in the first 6 months.
And I think the president wants to go a different direction, wants a little bit more discipline, a little more structure in there.
It remains unclear how Kelly's appointment will impact the chain of command at the White House, and if the former Homeland Security chief will exert any influence over the president's own behavior, including his use of Twitter.
You have to let Trump be Trump. Anybody who thinks they're going to change Donald Trump doesn't know Donald Trump.
The president remains at odds with many in his party over his repeated public attacks on Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
Well, it's kind of hurtful, but the president of the United States is a strong leader.
The two men are expected to come face-to-face today at the president's cabinet meeting. Trump also turning to health care this weekend, blasting the Senate's failed efforts to dismantle Obamacare, tweeting, "Unless the Republican senators are total quitters, repeal and replace is not dead." Despite the fact that it would have had no impact on Friday's defeat, the president also urging GOP leadership to change the Senate's rules so legislation can pass with a simple majority, saying that Republicans look like fools who are just wasting their time.
You know, I said from the beginning, let Obamacare implode and then do it.
Trump also threatening to end subsidy payments to insurance companies and even eliminate some health benefits for members of Congress if the bill is not passed.
What he's saying is, look, if Obamacare is hurting people, and it is, then why shouldn't it hurt insurance companies and, more importantly, perhaps for this discussion, members of Congress?
Senator Susan Collins, one of 3 Republican senators who voted against repeal, says Trump's threats wouldn't change her vote.
We need to go back to committee, to the Health Committee and the Finance Committee, identify the problems, carefully evaluate possible solutions through hearings, and then produce a series of bills to correct these problems.
Now, in addition to the domestic agenda and organizational issues, John Kelly is also going to be coming into this White House confronting a number of foreign policy challenges, including these escalating threats from North Korea, but also the U.S. relationship with Russia. We are still waiting to hear when President Trump will be signing this sanctions bill against Russia. Back to you guys.
Okay, Sarah, thank you very much for all of that. Let's bring in our political panel to discuss it. We have White House correspondent for Bloomberg News, Margaret Talev, and CNN political analysts John Avlon and Alex Burns. Great to see all of you. Happy Monday. Alex, I want to start with you because you have a very comprehensive article over the weekend in the New York Times about how frustrated Republicans have grown with the disarray and chaos in the White House. Now, are these Republicans like John Kasich, who never had much faith, or are these loyalists who are starting to turn?
Well, it's pretty much everybody, Allison. And what you're hearing from Trump loyalists is not anger at the president, but you're hearing anger at pretty much everybody else. And that includes Republicans on the Hill. It includes Republicans in the White House who are close to the president, but not the president himself. And this is sort of, you could see it as a coping mechanism, but it's definitely a new phase of the way Republicans in the grassroots and at the leadership level across the country are thinking about the president.
Why aren't they mad at him?
Well, they see him as a newcomer to Washington who's received a lot of bad advice and has been mistreated by Republicans on the Hill. Whether they are right about that or not, I do think that if you sort of play out the next couple steps of this, if you listen to what the president has been saying about Congress over the weekend, you can see that we're potentially headed for a pretty big collision between the forces behind the president and the more conventional leaders on Capitol Hill who want to continue to do things their way.
And Margaret, John Kelly, General Kelly, he's the guy who's going to fix everything starting today at 9:30 when he gets sworn in before this cabinet meeting, right?
No pressure. Right, John, right. No pressure, but by noon, everything should be completely in order. You know, I mean, there are a couple of questions, and one is how much has he already negotiated, or how much will he be able to lock down with the president in terms of who reports directly to him, what ability he has to be a gatekeeper in and out of the Oval Office, both physically and kind of, you know, in general. But also, does the president want more of a peer with whom to bounce off strategic ideas? Should I do this? Should I do that? We've heard folks like Corey Lewandowski say, the president's the president, there's no changing him. But if part of this move with John Kelly is to say, I recognize that I need to do things differently, that is maybe the main thing that has the potential to be a game changer.
Look, I mean, all sort of, ridiculous rhetoric about the White House acting like a well-oiled machine in the past aside, everyone recognizes there is a problem. This is not remotely normal, not only because of historic low approval ratings, but because of a daily churn of chaos that emanates from the Oval Office. So a new chief of staff may be a corrective that's needed. The president respects generals. John Kelly's got a good rapport with the president, apparently, as well as the other members of the cabinet who are former military. I also think, crucially, he served under Secretary Gates and Secretary Panetta, two really of the wise men of Washington who have a reputation for thinking and governing beyond partisanship, and that may be what this administration needs. Now, the idea of that someone's going to change Trump ain't going to happen, people. Look, Trump's going to be Trump, but maybe his instincts can be channeled more constructively.
Maybe. But, we don't know. Look, we don't know if the communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, we don't know if he'll report to the chief of staff or the president. You know, Scaramucci reported to the president before, not Reince Priebus. What about Jared Kushner?
Right.
Does Jared Kushner report to the president? What about Steve Bannon, who was this co-equal to Reince Priebus the way it was set up before? These are sort of important questions, Alex.
Well, and in some ways on an even more fundamental level, you know, when I was talking to Republicans in Washington over the weekend, their big question about John Kelly is, you know, we all like the idea. I mean, Americans like the idea of someone who's not a politician, somebody who has experience from the private sector or from the military being in charge of government. This is a White House that has a broken relationship with Congress. And a broken relationship with sort of just the traditional political mechanisms of Washington. Those are not mechanisms that John Kelly has spent his career operating. So if you're trying to figure out how to work with Capitol Hill, Reince Priebus was clearly not your guy to get that done. The president reached that conclusion a while ago. But is General Kelly the guy to do it? I don't know that there's anyone in or around the administration that sees him as sort of a cure-all for everything.
No. Mark, yeah, go ahead quickly.
One thing I think we need to push back upon is a framing of the problem in Washington as being outsiders versus establishment. I think it's perhaps better understood as competence versus incompetence. I think that's a more fair, less pejorative way of saying the challenges this administration is facing right now.
Margaret, let's look at the week, just to remind people, because it's hard to get your mind around what last week looked like, but we have some helpful Monopoly pieces here on the screen that will guide us through. On Monday, there were some attacks against the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and the president made a political speech, or at least portions of it, in front of the Boy Scouts.
Which the Boy Scouts later apologized for.
There you go. Next, he said that he was more presidential than every president except for Abraham Lincoln. That was on Tuesday, but I think the more happened on Tuesday.
Abraham Lincoln later apologized for that.
On Wednesday, he seemed to surprise the Joint Chiefs by banning transgender soldiers from the military. On Thursday, well, that was the Scaramucci explosion day. That went public. And then on Friday, Obamacare, the repeal and replace, failed, and Reince Priebus resigned. I think there was actually more even that happened that week, but that's just a starter course for where we are.
There really was. Two other things happened. One is that Jared Kushner came out publicly, put a public face after operating largely behind the scenes and said he didn't collude at all with the Russians. And the other is that, of course, the president had to come forward and signal, at least with a brief statement, that he was going to support, ultimately sign that sanctions legislation. So, look, this really is a reset week for the president. Last week was a fairly catastrophic week, and I think everyone inside the West Wing recognizes this not only as an opportunity, but as like a mandatory opportunity to kind of take back control of the process.
I want you all to sit back and imagine the most uncomfortable Thanksgiving meal you've ever had. And then, Alex, is that what this cabinet meeting, because the president will hold a cabinet meeting today, is that what that will feel like? You have Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, face-to-face, we believe, with the President of the United States for the first time since the president started his campaign of public humiliation against him. You know, what's that going to be like when the two men are sitting face-to-face? And do you think we'll see this, you know, cabinet fluff session, you know, literally going around the table, you know, saying, you know, dear leader, this is how much we like everything that you've done for us so far?
John, I think like an uncomfortable holiday meal with family, I think people will probably say a lot of positive things that they don't mean. And I think they will probably all be on their best behavior, right? I think that, you know, anyone expecting sort of public enmity between Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions face-to-face, if that were going to happen, it might have happened already. One of the sort of ironies of this president, right, is that he's known as such a tough guy, he's known as someone who likes firing people, actually hates face-to-face confrontation with people who he is close to. So, you know, I wouldn't be shocked to see him say really nice things about Jeff Sessions at the cabinet meeting, and then maybe turn around and say not so nice things in a different context. That's pretty much been the pattern with the president and a lot of people who are close to him.
Is this whole John Kelly move to chief of staff, is this part of a larger chess game, as has been speculated, where Jeff Sessions stays, but he's moved to Department of Homeland Security?
So I'm reluctant to embrace the chess metaphor with this presidency and administration. That said, there certainly has been a lot of telegraphing that this could be a quote-unquote elegant solution to the president's problem. You move Sessions over, you don't fire him, make it less of an insult, and then maybe put someone, a more compliant AG who comes in who would take the steps necessary to fire Mueller. If that happens, it will not actually solve the problem because it's transparently what it is. It's an attempt to basically just achieve the president's ends with sort of minimal insult.
And you're saying it won't work because Republicans
are going to recognize it for what it is. Lindsey Graham's already called it out and said that looks wrong, it feels wrong because it is wrong. And the fundamental problem is the president doggedly seems to want to derail the Russia investigation. And if he sidelines Mueller, if he files Mueller one way or the other, that's going to kick off a constitutional crisis. Make no mistake about it.
Hey, Margaret, let's talk about health care for one moment, because the president, Kellyanne Conway, suggested the president will decide this week whether or not he pulls subsidies to insurers, subsidies that actually help low-income Americans pay for health care. That is the next big decision we think the president has to make. You know, do you think he would go that far as to basically force Obamacare to implode on itself?
I'm loath to predict what the president's going to do for obvious reasons, but I'll say this. I think fundamentally there are two questions for the president. Number one is, does he really want to get into an all-out war with the Republican Party, of which he is the leader? He spent a lot of time calling Republican lawmakers them rather than us. But that's rhetoric, and this is something quite different. And number two, more broadly, is he going to try to, quote, let Obamacare fail by not doing stuff or by actively doing stuff? I think those are two different choices, both with political and potentially some legal ramifications. So we'll be watching this very closely, but I think what he has hinted at would be actually an enormous and fairly hostile act.
And I got to say, I think the Republican legislators want a week or so off right now from this. They don't want to have to deal with the
so does the
blowback.
president.
Right. Panel, thank you very much for all of the insights. Great to talk to you.
Thanks, guys.
Meanwhile, Vice President Mike Pence is in the Baltics, and he's taking on Russia over its retaliation for the U.S. sanctions that President Trump is expected to sign. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordering the U.S. to cut its diplomatic staff by more than half. CNN's Claire Sebastian is live in Moscow with more. What are the latest developments, Claire?
Yeah, Alison, 755 people. That's the number that President Putin says he wants to cut from the U.S. diplomatic presence here in Russia. I just want to bring you some clarification on what that will actually mean that we've got from the Kremlin in the last hour or so. They say that the people who it's affected, it's up to the U.S. to decide. It will be diplomats, non-diplomats, as well as local Russian staff. Now, we know that from numbers, the most recent that we've seen from the State Department from 2013, that Russian staff outnumbered U.S. staff here in Russia. So that just gives you a sense of the impact of that. But as for the State Department, a senior official told CNN that they are still assessing the impact of this and how to respond. If they do respond, Russia says they reserve the right to take countermeasures themselves, although President Putin said he does not think that would be a good idea at the moment. But further inflaming tensions here, Alison, as you say, is the presence of Vice President Mike Pence right on Russia's doorstep in Estonia today. Strong comments about how Russia is the biggest threat to the Baltic states, a, quote, unpredictable neighbor. And he had this to say about relations with Russia.
We hope for better days, for better relations with Russia. But recent diplomatic action taken by Moscow will not deter the commitment of the United States of America to our security, the security of our allies, and the security of freedom-loving nations around the world.
So the next step, of course, is that President Trump has said he will sign that sanctions bill. Vice President Mike Pence reaffirming that on that trip to Estonia. So certainly that won't change Moscow's position. They went ahead and retaliated before that happened, but it is certainly something they will be watching closely. John?
All right, Claire Sebastian for us in Moscow. Thank you so much, Claire. We do have some breaking news out of Afghanistan. Reuters is reporting that ISIS is claiming responsibility for a deadly attack on the Iraqi embassy in Kabul. The attack started when a suicide bomber blew himself up at the gate, allowing gunmen to get into the embassy and fight with security forces. This attack comes a week after the Taliban leveled an attack on government workers in Kabul, killing 35 people.
Police in Alabama are hunting for a fugitive following a jailbreak. 12 inmates escaped from the Walker County Jail last night. Police have recaptured 11 of them overnight. Jail officials not saying how these men got out. Police are, though, urging people in the area to stay off the streets until the manhunt is completely over. All
right, tensions boiling over and turning violent at an airport in France. An EasyJet passenger tweeted the moment a member of the ground staff in Nice punched a man holding a baby. An airport official says the victim complained about an 11-hour flight delay when he was hit in the face. A fellow passenger says the punch left a mark. The baby, thankfully, was not hurt. The airport says the attacker, who works for a subcontractor, not EasyJet, has been suspended.
All right, well, his anger management class has not worked out, obviously, for him. That is not the right response when a customer
No, my customer service
complains.
response in the questionnaire, I might have said, did not meet expectations.
Very good point. Meanwhile, there's been a dramatic shakeup at the White House. Reince Priebus out, John Kelly in as White House Chief of Staff. What do the president's strongest supporters in Congress think of this change? We talk to them next.
All of them.
In just a few hours, General John Kelly will be sworn in as White House Chief of Staff, replacing Reince Priebus. Priebus is the 7th person to leave the Trump administration in just 6 months. Does his departure mark a new beginning? Joining us now is Republican Congressman Chris Collins of New York. Good morning, Congressman.
Oh, good morning, Allison.
Nice to see you.
How are you?
I'm well. So, what do you think will change with General John Kelly as Chief of Staff?
Well, first of all, let me put a little different spin on what we heard earlier from Alex. This has been a great week for the president. I was at the Jamboree, 40,000 Boy Scouts shouting, "We love Trump, we love Trump," banning transgenders, which is probably supported by the vast majority of Americans.
Well, hold on, Congressman, wait a second, just 1 second here. He didn't tell the Pentagon. Okay, the Joint Chiefs were taken by surprise. How is that a great rollout of a new policy?
President Trump is President Trump. He is the commander-in-chief. He can roll things out however he wants. He doesn't report to the Joint Chiefs. They report to him.
Sure, but it creates a little bit of chaos, you'll agree, right? They didn't know about this policy. They, in fact, have said they're not going to do anything about it. They're not going to enact it because there are no details for how to do so.
Well, he's going to be rolling that out. But again, he's the President of the United States Commander-in-Chief. On Friday, we were in New York City talking about MS-13, something that is the scourge of America. He's taking the fight to the criminal element. He's dealing with North Korea. He's dealing with Russia. And now he has solidified the inner circle of the West Wing with John Kelly, with Anthony Scaramucci, two great individuals. I think it's all coming together extremely well as we move into tax reform. And let's remember, it was 6 months ago that President Trump said, let's not work on health care. Let's move on tax reform because we're not going to be able to do health care by ourselves. We need Democrat help. He knew we weren't going to get Democrat help. We didn't get Democrat help. We wasted 6 months on health care.
Look, Democrats say they weren't invited to the table, as you know. And by the way, you didn't actually need the Democrats. You could have done it just with Republicans in the Senate, but that didn't work either.
Well, of course, you're not going to get 50 out of 52 senators, not with Susan Collins and Murkowski and John McCain. You were kind of like, you weren't going to get there right out of the gate. Obviously, we didn't.
Right, so you can't blame Democrats for that.
We should have been working on tax reform. Oh, sure we can. They're the ones that created Obamacare. They wouldn't help us fix it. Now you got Joe Manchin saying, let's get together, but by the way, we're not going to touch the expansion.
Well, hold on a second, Congressman. They say that they will help you fix it. They won't help you repeal it.
No, they'll help us fix it on their terms, and we're not going to continue to pay 90% on expansion in the expansion states for able-bodied workers when we pay 50% for the blind and disabled. They want to fix it on their terms.
Well, sure, and you want to repeal it on your terms, but isn't
flawed.
This the point, is that there has to be some sort of negotiation between both parties? And Democrats say they were never invited to any closed-door meetings.
They are going to wear it. You know, we said to America, and America agrees, Obamacare has failed, it's failing, it's imploding. I have suggested to the president we absolutely end the cost-sharing revenues on Tuesday. That's tomorrow. To insurance companies, the courts have ruled they're illegal. For anyone to suggest that Trump would be pulling the rug out from under the individual marketplace, when the federal courts have ruled the payments are illegal, let's follow the law, let's end them.
And you don't think that that will create chaos in the marketplace, that insurance companies don't know
absolutely
what
create
the cost...
chaos.
Well,
it will create chaos.
And how does that help Americans?
No, it's Obamacare that's failed. The very insurance companies and hospitals that railed against the American Health Care Act are now going to have to live with Obamacare for the next 9 months, the next 12 months, which includes reduced dish payments to hospitals. The CSRs, the cost-sharing revenues, were deemed illegal by a federal court, Allison.
And yet, I hear you, Congressman, but the lowest income Americans do rely on them, and pulling them just out from under them today would create chaos, according to the experts. So why go down that road?
Well, we're not going to break. That's why we had to get rid of Obamacare. That's why the Democrats should have helped us. That's why the insurance companies should not have railed against us in the hospitals. Now we're stuck with Obamacare for the foreseeable future with all the negative pieces. And you can't just tweak this piece and that when there's $800 billion of taxes, fees, and penalties that are a drag on the economy. So we now have Obamacare for the foreseeable future with all the problems we have, especially in the individual marketplace. Connecticut doesn't even have an insurer next year. Iowa, 94 out of 99 counties don't have an insurer
So that's
next
it. So,
year.
Congressman, that's it. You're just going to watch whatever happens next, or are you going to go to the table with some of the moderates, the 40 moderates in the House, who say that they are ready to go back to the drawing board?
Well, by the way, I'm one of those moderates. And we met with the New Dems last week, and you know what the New Dems said?
What?
Basically, they said we're not going to talk about ending the expansion, the 90% reimbursement for able-bodied adults. They basically said we'll tweak something a little bit here or there, but we need more money to do this. We need more money to do that, and we're not going to talk about rolling back the expansion of Medicaid. It was all but a joke. The
Okay,
meeting
so
was,
from
frankly, a waste of our time.
That's interesting. So from where you sit, there is nothing more the House can do.
Well, on health care, no. We're
That's
moving
what I
to tax reform, and I would say the insurance companies and are going to have to deal with what they're going to have to deal with, because we tried, Allison, we tried to fix this thing, and it didn't play out. So now that it's dead, this is the law of the land. Obamacare is the law of the land. The federal judge has ruled the cost-sharing revenues are illegal. We tried to fix it. Not a single Democrat stood with us when we tried to fix it. And now they're going to say it's our fault. You know, give me a break.
Congressman, one more thing. You said that the president, you see good signs ahead. He's trying to solidify the White House and the West Wing. Do you believe that Anthony Scaramucci, the new director of communications for the White House, should report to General John Kelly, the new chief of staff, or to the president?
It doesn't matter to me. I mean, let me tell you, Anthony Scaramucci is a tough guy in his own skin. He's got the ear of the president, and so will John Kelly. I would say, frankly, it doesn't matter.
But I mean, how do you solidify it? The reason I ask is because you're saying that now it's going to be streamlined, it's going to be solidified. How do you solidify something if people aren't reporting to the chief of staff?
Well, Anthony Scaramucci is the communications director, the spokesperson. Who he reports to, you know, doesn't matter. One thing about President Trump, he talks to who he needs to talk to, when he needs to talk to them, and quite frankly, an org chart, that doesn't mean anything to me, because when he needs to talk to someone, he's going to, and I have no doubts whatsoever that John Kelly and Anthony Scaramucci, along with his other advisors, are going to work very well together, and who cares what the org chart looks like?
Very quickly, I know that this is the first face-to-face meeting with Jeff Sessions and the president today at this cabinet meeting. How do you think that's going to go?
I think it's going to go just fine. Jeff Sessions, a good friend of President Trump, and he's taken some shots. He's a good friend of mine as well. He's a professional. I think the meeting, it will be a non-issue. It's going to be absolutely a non-issue.
And you think he stays in his job for the foreseeable future?
I hope so. I mean, he's a great attorney general. I certainly hope that Jeff Sessions remains in that job. If there's a change, everyone serves at the pleasure of the president. We all know that. But personally, a good friend of Jeff Sessions, I hope he stays.
Congressman Chris Collins, thanks so much for being on New Day.
Good to be with you, Allison.
John.
All is well. The meditation clearly working for Congressman Chris Collins of New York. All right, North Korea launching a new ballistic missile. What can the...
Healthcare still very much on President Trump's mind. He tweeted about it a lot this weekend, threatening to cut subsidies to Congress and insurance companies. saying, quote, if a new health care bill is not approved quickly, bailouts for insurance companies and bailouts for members of Congress will end very soon. Joining us now is Republican Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee. Thanks for being here in studio.
Sure. Good to be with you.
Are you getting a bailout from the federal government?
No, all members of Congress are on the Affordable Care Act. We're all on the D.C. Small Business Exchange. And as the federal government has done, they provide a portion of insurance as a benefit to employees.
Right. The president doesn't like those for members of Congress.
That's right. And so many of our employees, even those that are in our districts, Allison, are on the D.C. Exchange. And one of the things we tell people all the time, we know firsthand the problems with health care. And we think that the Senate needs to get to work and send the House a bill so that we can get this fixed.
And let's talk about that. But just one last thing, because the president seems fixated on this. What if those subsidies went away? I mean, look, he's threatening to cut the subsidies that he give the cost sharing, okay, with insurance companies that go to low-income Americans. So that's one of the threats, and then the other threat is the subsidies that
the subsidies
Congress gets
that go to the insurance companies are there. It's called the risk corridors, and this is one of the reasons that we have to fix this. I hear from people all the time about the cost of insurance, and when you look at the $9 million in the Affordable Care Act marketplace, only 1.6 million Americans buy this insurance product without a subsidy.
Yeah, so I guess
all the rest of those, and that is why the president keeps saying, you know, we need to look at those subsidies, but it's why we keep saying this has to be fixed. The insurance is too expensive to afford.
Right.
And when you're talking about only 1.6 million Americans buying a product without a subsidy, you see how expensive it is.
Yeah, I hear you. But
Plus,
my question is, what if he takes it away?
If he takes it away, then Congress will be forced to take an action and try to clean this up. I don't know what it would be, but there would be an action necessary to clean it up. You cannot afford this insurance. 19 million Americans opted themselves out of the system. 6.5 million chose to pay the penalty, and then you had another 12 that went in there and said, look, I'm going to seek an exemption for this.
Yeah.
So you've already got that 19 million that opted out.
But do you get the impression that President Trump is looking to speed the demise of the Affordable Care Act as he sees it by withdrawing those cost-sharing subsidies?
President Trump, I believe, is looking to solve the problem. And the problem is we've got the Senate who cannot seem to, you know, they like to work in gangs. So they've been the gang of 7 and 8. I want the gang of 51. I want the Senate to show some spine and fix this problem.
That seems to be impossible. I mean, what you're calling for, they are not all of one mind. Obviously, they've tried for 7 years.
51 of them need to make a decision that they're going to fulfill a promise to the American people and send the House a bill so that we can get this issue resolved. It's not fair to anybody, Allison. I had a telephone town hall last week. 80% of the people on that town hall, regardless of what side of the issue they were on with the Affordable Care Act, 80% said the Senate needed to pass a bill and send it to the House so we can fix this.
I understand, but I mean, their 7-year effort of trying to repeal and replace came to an end last week. There was no consensus. You can't get all 51 that you're calling for to all agree on what the way forward is. So now what?
You know, they're going to have to just do a process of sitting down, working through where they can get this gang of 51 to agree on something, send it to the House, so that we can fulfill a promise and be fair to the American people that are stuck in the Affordable Care Act system or who have insurance that is too expensive to use and deductibles too high to even seek access to care.
Very quickly, I want to ask you about Russia. How would you like President Trump to respond to Vladimir Putin now that Putin is cutting U.S. diplomatic staff by 755 people?
I want him to continue to be firm with Russia. Sending in the 59 Tomahawk missiles in that Syrian attack was the appropriate thing to do. Doing the sanctions bill was an appropriate move for Congress, and President Trump needs to basically have Congress's back, if you will, on the sanctions and be very firm with Russia.
Got it. Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn, thanks so much
So
for
good to be
being
with
here.
you.
Great to
Good
have
to
you in
see you.
studio. Let's get over to John.
All right, Allison. New Jersey Governor Chris Christie getting into a Cubs fan's face at a baseball game. What he said and what started the whole thing next in Bleacher Report. Raising eyebrows.
And when you see these towns and when you see these thugs being thrown into the back of a paddy wagon, you just see them thrown in, rough. I said, please don't be too nice. Like when you guys put somebody in the car and you're protecting their head, you know, the way you put their hand over. Like, don't hit their head, and they've just killed somebody, don't hit their head. I said, you can take the hand away, okay?
All right, so was the president encouraging police to be rough with suspects? Joining us now, CNN law enforcement analyst, retired NYPD Detective Harry Houck, and former Philadelphia Police Commissioner Charles Ramsey. Commissioner, I want to start with you. I want to read you a statement from the current New York City Police Commissioner, James O'Neill, who said to suggest that police officers apply any standard in the use of force other than what is reasonable and necessary is irresponsible, unprofessional, and sends the wrong message to law enforcement as well as the public. Your response, Commissioner?
Well, I would agree with Commissioner O'Neill. I was very concerned when I first heard those remarks because I believe it reinforces a very negative stereotype of police that we've been trying to overcome, and that is that police use excessive force on a regular basis. We violate people's constitutional rights, and nothing could be further from the truth. Police are out there every single day operating in a very professional manner, taking some very dangerous people off the streets and doing so without using excessive force or violating people's rights. And I think that gave an impression that we just do not need.
Harry Houck, did it send the wrong message?
Well, you know, I sat there and I watched it, and what's really key here is when he made that comment, you heard everybody laugh in the audience. Right? They took it all as a joke, and so did I. I didn't think he was serious. I don't think any police officer out there in the right frame of mind would take that as a way of condoning that kind of activity. All right, so I don't think it's really that big a deal. I think it was just playing to the police officers, trying to get a laugh there. You know, he's a very pro-police officer. You know, we're very happy we finally have a president like that.
There's actually three things you said there, and I want to talk about each one. I'm going to ask the commissioner about the laughing in a moment. I'm going to talk about the attitudes of police in general towards the president in a second, too. But I want to make one thing clear here from your point of view. Is it okay to condone, you know, rough treatment from police officers?
No.
So it's not okay?
No, listen, a police officer knows the rules, knows how to act out there. I mean, there isn't any police officers that listen to that statement and say, okay, I'm going to rough somebody up now because the president told me I could.
What if there's one?
Right? You know, what can you do if there's one? I mean, there are people out there that are crazy, and they hear some kind of comments that somebody made somewhere. Like, look when Obama said.
Listen, but you're saying those statements, if it's not a joke, is inappropriate, correct?
Right, exactly. Yes,
okay, so if he wasn't joking, how do you know he's joking?
Well, how do you know he's not?
I don't.
Right, so
but I will say this. If, you know, of the hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officials out there, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 who didn't take it as a joke, who took it as maybe a green light to behave differently.
Well, then I guess it shouldn't be a police officer, so you should be level-headed. And I'm sure the commissioner will agree with me here, is that if you're a police officer and you take that comment as an okay to commit any kind of physical force against somebody that's not justified, that's a bad thing.
All right, Commissioner, what if he's just joking? Was it just a joke?
Well, first of all, I agree with the last statement that he just made. But, I mean, this is the President of the United States. He's Commander-in-Chief, not a stand-up comic. Words matter. And there's responsibility that goes along with leadership. Your words can actually influence behavior. It can shape public opinion. And you have to be very, very careful and measure your words very carefully whenever you're in a setting like that. So whether it was a joke or not, it was inappropriate. I think those officers, I don't know if they were just starstruck because they're standing behind the president, which doesn't happen every day, and he made a comment and they thought they needed to laugh or applaud. I don't know, but if they truly believe that, then they ought to be ashamed, because that's not what policing's all about.
So they should not have been laughing or applauding, you're saying?
No. Well, you
it
know,
depends
these
on
things
how they take
happen spontaneously. These things happen spontaneously. So it doesn't mean that everyone who applauded or laughed actually believes what it is he said, but it just gave the wrong impression. And that's what I'm trying to get at. And we've got a lot to overcome. It's been a rough 3 years. In fact, the only reason the police have not been on front and center on news stories around the country is because of President Trump. He took us off the front page. But that doesn't mean the issues and the problems have gone away.
Commissioner, something Harry said is something that I have heard from officers, you know, since Friday here. You know, both of you suggested maybe they laughed because they were uncomfortable, laughed maybe because it was gallows humor, not laughing because they're necessarily supporting him in that statement. However, Commissioner, most officers I have heard from say that they do feel that this president has their back, and those are the exact words that they use, has their back in a way that they did not.
Appreciate it very much. Let's get some reaction. Mike Rogers, first to you. What do you think?